how has this conflict affected life in Gaza?
Even the people of Gaza, up until October 6th, actually were doing very, very well because they were working inside Israel. They had, in fact, just a couple of months before October 7, as a gesture of goodwill, the government of Israel, working with the government of Hamas in Gaza, agreed jointly to increase the number of work permits given to residents of the Gaza enclave. Unfortunately, after 2007, we had the beginning of the Palestinian civil war. So about 1,000 Palestinian government officials were killed in the Palestinian civil war, which raged up until 2009. But anyway, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel intervened, and they stopped the civil war. And unfortunately, ever since, Palestine and Palestinians have been divided between Hamas in Gaza and Palestinian government in the West Bank. This has really hurt the Palestinians. Hamas's militant wing joined hands with ISIS in Sinai, and the Egyptian army had to fight ISIS in Sinai, who were actually in cahoots with the militant wing of Hamas across the border inside Gaza. The economic devastation, as I said, there are joint businesses, Ali, between people of Gaza and people of Israel. By the way, most of the settlements, the Israeli towns or the kibbutz and settlements right on the border between Israel and Gaza, these communities were thriving on both sides, the Palestinians, the Gazan side, and the Israeli side. So they all knew each other. So the Israelis on this side and the Gazans on that side did business together. They had joint ventures. Some of the Palestinians from Gaza side used to come here and work. There's the damage done by the Israeli military, IDF, there's no question about it. And there's the damage done by Hamas, which dismantled, for example, the water pipes that were built and funded by the World Bank and EU and the US government.
Viewers, very warm welcome to another episode of V News English program Perspectives, in which we bring before you some of the most insightful perspectives on the most significant global and regional developments which are happening around the world. So today we are joined by a leading authority on the security and geopolitics of Middle East, a very close and keen observer and an expert on Middle East affairs, Mr. Ahmed Quraishi. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Quraishi.
It's always great to be with you and good to see you after quite some time.
Thank you so much. So viewers, today we are almost near 2 years since the conflict between Hamas and Israel started. And we keep hearing about its diplomatic dimension, its military aspect, its humanitarian angle. But there's much more to it that every conflict, unfortunately, leads to or affects. And that is the human life. So Mr. Quraishi is an authority on Palestinian affairs. He has visited Lebanon, I remember very well, and he knows a lot of people in that part of the world. So I want to ask Mr. Quraishi that how has this conflict affected life in Gaza in particular, but what is the public sentiment in Palestine in general? Are they happy? Are they standing by with the government? Are they supporting Hamas? Or what is the nature of their standing in the last 2 years?
This is such a pertinent question, one that you don't hear much about. So I'm glad that you asked this, and please call me Ahmed, for this. It's not Mr. Quraishi, and I'll call you Ali. And so Ali, basically, we have actually 3 different Palestinians involved in this conflict, not just one. Everybody actually discusses just the Gazans, the people in Gaza, but actually you have 3 distinct, different segments or groups of Palestinians. Of course, first is the Gazans themselves, and the second is obviously the West Bank Palestinians. And then, of course, you have the Palestinians who are Israeli Palestinians who have Israeli citizenship and live inside Israel. And it's not a small, number of people. It's a bit over 2 million Palestinians who are Arab Israelis or Palestinian Israel, whatever you want to call them.
Ahmed, that's
So
a
you have
very important starting point. Let me interrupt you to ask
sure.
you, can you put some sort of numbers into these three groups of Palestinians so that our international viewers understand how many people are we talking about in Gaza, in West Bank, and those who are resident in Israel?
Exactly. So we all know, of course, that in Gaza we have about 2.2 or 2.3 million, so 2,300,000 almost Palestinians in Gaza. And then we have a little over 2 million Palestinians inside Israel who are Israeli citizens. A little over 2 million. And then you have somewhere, I'm not exactly sure about the figure for West Bank. We need to be accurate. So I don't want to exactly pinpoint a number, but it's roughly somewhere between around 3 million in West Bank. So it's roughly 3, 2, and 2. So we're talking
Around
about
7 million.
About 7 million to 8 million exactly. I may be a bit off mark on the exact figures. So, but we are 100% sure that we have 2.3 in Gaza, and we have a little over 2 in Israel, and we have somewhere around 3 in West Bank. So the interesting thing is, and of course, then you have the diaspora, you have Palestinians who used to be in refugee camps. They're still called refugee camps, but they're not really. If you go to, for example, the refugee Barajne in Beirut, for example, it's called refugee camp. But if you go there, it's actually a city. It's a city like any other city. And the same goes for the Yarmouk camp in Syria, and then the camp in Baghdad. So all of these, of course. So you have Palestinians in all of these places, and of course, then you have the Palestinians who are living in the Gulf. And there was a time, of course, if you recall, the biggest Palestinian diaspora outside Palestinian territories and outside Jordan was in Kuwait up until 1990, when then Yasser Arafat and PLO supported Saddam Hussein, and of course, after liberation of Kuwait from the Iraqi invasion and occupation, basically all those about roughly between 400,000 and 500,000 Palestinians, let's say 500,000 Palestinians actually had to end and get uprooted, by the way, because a large number of them actually came from Haifa, Jaffa, and territories which are now Israel, and territories which are Palestinian territories, West Bank. Most of them actually very few actually were from Gaza. So, and Gaza, Ali, we also have to understand Gaza Palestinians always were at a disadvantage within the Palestinian hierarchy, the social hierarchy. So the Palestinians the Gaza Palestinians were always seen as maybe least educated. We're seen as maybe least accessible economically, least empowered politically within the Palestinian society. And also you could identify them from their dialect. So you could see the more sophisticated Palestinians who were from the coastal areas, which are now Israel, and then the educated Palestinians from Jerusalem, obviously, and the large 2 or 3 cities, Nablus in the West Bank, Ramallah, and Beit Lahem, and then at the very bottom of this rung were the Gaza Palestinians. But all of this, Ali, you'll be surprised, changed dramatically after 2005, when Israel ended its occupation and its settlement in Gaza, and it withdrew as a result of the Oslo Accords. They were about 10 years late. As you know, the Accords were signed in 1995, but they withdrew in 2005. So when they withdrew from Gaza, the fate of Gaza changed. Gaza suddenly became, and you can Google these headlines even now. Suddenly, everybody started talking about a new Singapore or Hong Kong or Dubai on the Mediterranean. Actually, it was Singapore on the Mediterranean. So everybody began to, if you just Google this, Singapore on the Mediterranean, you'll get all these newspaper reports about Gaza. What happened? All of a sudden, Gazans, I would say, I won't say they became the richest, but they became very, very well off because beginning in 2005, huge amounts of foreign aid, investment, grants from both the West, who were the biggest donors, and the rich Arabs, the second largest donors. And then, of course, you had China, you had Russia, you had Japan, you had Singapore, other countries, Australia, and others. So the fate of the Gaza changed. If you remember seeing the clips from Gaza at the beginning of this unfortunate war on October 7, you will recall that probably there was an inordinate number of high rises in Gaza. Gaza city was very developed, excellent infrastructure, excellent schools, hospitals. Actually, you'd be surprised, Ali, if I tell you that immediately in the first few months after October 7, the war began, the Egyptians, ordinary people on social media began discussing in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Egypt, began discussing how developed actually Gaza is. And they were saying, it's surprising to have this number of very well equipped, high standard medical facilities, hospitals in Gaza built by Indonesia, by UAE, by European Union, by Turkey, by everybody actually all over the world, built hospitals, educational institutions, water purification plants, whatnot, electricity grid. Gaza it's a small enclave, but very, very well developed. And add to that, obviously, the Palestinian diaspora, both in the Gulf and in the West. So a lot of money actually was coming into Gaza. So you have these really amazing residential suburbs in Gaza named after different places, Sheikh Zayed City, King Khalid City, Sheikh Ahmed City, and others, obviously Jordanians, Moroccans, King Al Hassan of Morocco, and others, the Indonesian hospital, and the Kuwaiti hospital, and whatnot. Sheikh Hamad City. So Gaza really developed much better than maybe many of the cities in the West Bank.
But I want to, I think this is extremely insightful, Ahmed, but I want you to share your brief assessment that how this 2-year long war has affected different Palestinians in different ways.
The Palestinians, my teachers were Palestinians in Kuwait. I was born there. In fact, my early, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I remember going to places where people were carrying AK-47s. I didn't know, of course, they were AK-47s. They were huge, guns. And I was a 7 or 8 year old. And I used to accompany my Palestinian friends from school. They're either elder brothers or uncles or cousins or even fathers were training as fidayin in the first PLO camps, which a lot of people don't know. The first PLO camps actually were established not in Lebanon or Jordan or anywhere else, or Syria or Iraq or any of the revolutionary places. They were actually established in Kuwait because Yasser Arafat was working as a public works engineer in the Ministry of Public Works of Kuwait. And in roughly mid-1960s, 1965, the Kuwaiti government approached him and suggested, why not? He was obviously, like most Palestinians, he was politically very active. So they offered him to establish PLO and Al-Fatah, and the first training camps were in Kuwait. So what I'm just telling you is that the Palestinians, I grew up with, and I remained in touch with, and I continue to remain in touch with, both in the West Bank and in Jordan, and of course in the Palestinian diaspora in across the Middle East and in the West. I have to tell you this, Ali, and I tell this to my Palestinian friends, and I think everything we read about the Nakba of 1948 is nothing. Is really nothing, even in terms of size and dimension and impact compared to what happened after October 7 in Gaza. Because if you go by the simplest of metrics, which is the numbers, when you talk about the Nakba and how devastating it was, and it was definitely, the numbers did not exceed 700 to 800,000 Palestinians, the number of displaced Palestinians. 700 to 800,000 displaced Palestinians. The number of the dead, both Palestinians on the Arabs at that time, of course, you did not refer to them as Palestinians. You said Arabs of Palestine or the Jews of Palestine. The figures of the dead were, definitely were not very huge, but the displaced on the Palestinian side were about 700 to 800,000. It was a much smaller figure, obviously, on the Jewish side, on the Jewish.
So are you saying in the last 2 years, the number of displaced Palestinians is at least 3 times more than what happened in 1948?
Definitely. There's no question about this. Definitely.
So that is the scale of displacement. Now, I want you to
disproportionate. Ali, and it's also disproportionate. In Nakba 48, it was all over the historic British Mandate Palestine. This time, it's just concentrated in Gaza. That's all. So the Palestinians in Israel, the Israeli Palestinians, and the Palestinians in the West Bank are not affected, obviously. They're not displaced. The Palestinian cities are doing very well. As a matter of fact, I have a few friends in a couple of cities in the West Bank, and also in Israel, like in Nazareth, which is completely Palestinian city inside Israel. And during the Valentine season, Feb 14, for example, both inside Israel, obviously, but also mainly in the West Bank, people were living normal lives. So it's basically the devastation, the Nakba this time, 3 times more than 48 Nakba. It's all concentrated just in Gaza. That's all.
Okay. Now, because we have limited time, I want you to ask 2 very important questions. How this 2-year-long conflict has affected the public support and political base of Hamas within Palestinians?
It's very important for me to say this to you, Ali, that a lot of people don't know this, but Palestinians have probably the best per capita income of all Arabs, other than the Gulf Arabs, of all Arabs. So Palestinians live better than the Egyptians, the average, per capita income, if you compare it that way. The Jordanians, the Syrians, and the Lebanese, Palestinians live very, very well in terms of infrastructure, of schooling, of education, health, and everything, and their incomes. So obviously, because of, let's be very honest, Palestinians have always been, over the past 100 years, at that time they were the Arabs of Palestine, they were probably the most exposed to Europe and the changes in Europe, mainly because historically the Palestinian territories or the historic Palestine was always open to migrations. So you had migrations, the Armenians, and then you have people from the Caucasus, and you had the Jews, you had the Christians, and you had the Arabs also from Syria, from Egypt, from Sinai, from northern Arabia, which became Jordan, and also the parts of the northern Saudi Arabia, and the Bedouin parts of Iraq and Syria. All of these were migrating and moving around, in and out, in and out, in and out. And of course, you had the Christian pilgrimage migration, and you had the Jewish pilgrimage. So the Palestinian territories and cities were very open, were the first actually to be very, very exposed, just as Beirut was, or Egypt, Alexandria was. The Palestinians were very well educated, and they mingled obviously with all the Christians and the Jewish migration that came from Europe. So and they had joined businesses, and I recall, Ali, when I opened my eyes and I was growing up in Kuwait, one of the richest Gulf states. I remember when I went for the first time to the West Bank and to the coastal cities of Israel, I remember looking at the infrastructure and saying, it's almost as if I'm back to my childhood, because most of the engineers from those cities, from those parts in the West Bank and what later became Israel, came to Kuwait and helped build buildings there, the same infrastructure, the same kind of thing. And it was actually taken and was inspired by the coastal areas of Italy, Greece, and France. So a lot of similarities. So what I'm just trying to tell you is that the Palestinians, first of all, had very good lifestyle, continue to do right now. And even the people of Gaza, up until October 6th, actually were doing very, very well because they were working inside Israel. They had, in fact, just a couple of months before October 7, as a gesture of goodwill, the government of Israel, working with the government of Hamas in Gaza, agreed jointly to increase the number of work permits given to residents of the Gaza enclave. So what happened is that, I don't exactly recall the figure, but it was substantially increased, the number of work permits given by Israel as a gift, not directly to the residents of Gaza, but to the Hamas government. So what Hamas government did, and I have pictures of those, and they're available on, you can Google them, you'll see pictures of offices opened by Hamas government in Gaza, in various parts of Gaza, for people, for Gazans to come and apply for the Israeli work permit. And there was such a rush, for that, obviously, because you work inside Israel. Israel has a very strong economy. You earn in Israeli local currency, which is the shekels. And shekel is used, by the way, even now, dollar and shekel are used both in the West Bank, and they're used inside Gaza as well. So better lifestyle than most of the neighbors.
So Ahmed, I want you to I want you to briefly respond to my question that how this 2-year-long conflict has affected the public sentiment and support base for Hamas within the Palestinians.
Gaza established its international airport back in somewhere between 2005 and 2007. An international airport. And everybody was talking about Singapore, the next Singapore on the Mediterranean. The economy of Gaza was booming. Money was coming from all over the world up until just 3 years ago, just before October 7. Money was coming from all over the world because everybody was generous with Gaza, because Gaza was to be the nucleus of the future Palestinian state. So Israeli army, the settlers, the settlements, all dismantled. And this was supposed to become the nucleus, the experiment, the mini experiment for the upcoming rising Palestinian state. Unfortunately, after 2007, we had the beginning of the Palestinian civil war. So about 1,000 Palestinian government officials were killed in the Palestinian civil war, which raged up until 2009. And I tell you, Ali, and you can Google it. It's today we have all information is available online. Had Egypt, Jordan, and Israel not intervened, these three countries, the Palestinian civil war would have raged, and it would have devastated both, obviously, Gaza and the West Bank. And I will not get into the details, but everybody knows basically Hamas won the election. And they ruled for a year, and then they were dismissed by the President Mahmoud Abbas, who continues to be the president of Palestine. And he dismissed the Hamas government because of corruption and a number of other things. And Hamas refused to leave because it had a militant wing, and it used that militant wing to execute a coup against the Palestinian government. Up to 1,000. Even right now, if you go to the website of the Palestinian Authority government or the Palestinian government website, you have a special section of roughly about 1,000, the names and details of those 1,000 Palestinian government officials who were killed, and they were brutally killed. I mean, fathers who were taking the children to school, they were shot in front of the kids. And so forth. It was dramatic. But anyway, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel intervened, and they stopped the civil war. And unfortunately, ever since, Palestine and Palestinians have been divided between Hamas in Gaza and Palestinian government in the West Bank. This has really hurt the Palestinians because that was the first setback for the Palestinians. And the second setback is October 7 because it destroyed the economy of Gaza, completely destroyed. You had such a huge economy, such well-developed, small enclave, but very, very well-developed. I know that a lot of people listening to us right now, Ali, will say, wait a second, but Gaza was an open-air prison. Gaza was not getting anything. People were supposed to be, destitute, living a very difficult life. I would agree with only one description, actually, of all of this. A lot of this was politics, Ali, as you know. I would disagree with one, which is, to a certain extent, open-air prison in the sense that Egypt and Israel, I wouldn't say Jordan because Jordan doesn't have a direct border with Gaza, but Jordan and Egypt and Israel had a blockade, and the blockade existed obviously because Hamas was ruling and had taken over Gaza, and it was a militant organization. And due to Hamas, by the way, the very first blockade actually came from Egypt, not even Israel, actually. It came from Egypt because Hamas's militant wing joined hands with ISIS in Sinai. And the Egyptian army had to fight ISIS in Sinai, who were actually in cahoots with the militant wing of Hamas across the border inside Gaza. And the Egyptian army actually had to close many tunnels. This happened between 2011 and 2013. The Egyptian army had to seal dozens of tunnels between the border of Egypt and Gaza, tunnels that were created by the militant wing of Hamas. So there's a lot of history, but just to your point, the devastation, the economic devastation, the as I said, there are joint businesses, Ali, between people of Gaza and people of Israel. By the way, most of the settlements, the Israeli towns or the kibbutz and settlements right on the border between Israel and Gaza, these communities were thriving on both sides, the Palestinians, the Gazan side, and the Israeli side. So they all knew each other. So the Israelis on this side and the Gazans on that side did business together. They had joint ventures. Some of the Palestinians from Gaza side used to come here and work in the workshops and other setups and institutions and small companies and workshops and whatnot. So there was a lot of, I would say, economic integration, a lot of economic integration. The reason why 2 months before October 7th, the Israeli government increased the number of work permits is to increase this integration and for it to be a sort of a gesture of goodwill to Hamas. Not the people of Gaza actually had no problem. And by the way, you'd be surprised, Ali, also to know that the beach of Gaza, you've heard President Trump and others say, it's such a great piece of real estate, Gaza. You'd be surprised to know that up until before October 7th, the beach side of Gaza used to see tremendous tourism. And you had hotels, some of them continue to stand right now, that used to go for up to $200 in the high season to $200 in dollars, $200 to $250 per night. And that tourism did not come from Europe or from Arab countries or from somewhere else. It was an internal tourism that came from the West Bank, mostly, and from inside Gaza itself. So you can imagine if you had hotels on the beach in Gaza, on Gaza City, and other beaches, alongside the Gaza coastal area, going up to $200 and $250 per night in the high season. You can imagine, what kind of economy was actually working. That has now been completely devastated. By the way, I don't want to be completely pessimistic. Even now, despite the huge devastation that the Israeli military has done to Gaza's infrastructure, and I would also say Hamas also has done, because Hamas has used the infrastructure of Gaza. I mean, there's the damage done by the Israeli military, IDF, there's no question about it, and there's the damage done by Hamas, which dismantled, for example, the water pipes that were built and funded by the World Bank and EU and the US government and the rich Gulf states, and dismantle all these pipes and use them as rockets and whatnot, So it's both actually the Israeli military machine and the Hamas military machine, actually, that dismantled the Gaza infrastructure. All of the economic devastation, 2 million, 2.3 million. I mean, it's huge. And imagine these 2.3 million who used to have joint ventures across the border inside Israel. And even now, Ali, if you talk about West Bank Palestinians and the 2 million Arab Israelis or the Palestinian Israelis inside Israel, all of them actually are very integrated economically in joint ventures. So I recall when I was touring the West Bank and Israeli cities, it was a very normal sight, actually, to enter a restaurant and find young men and women, waiters and waitresses, who are speaking both Arabic and Hebrew. And of course, as a journalist, Ali, I would not let that moment go without asking a few questions. And I asked him, and I was surprised to discover that in most of these restaurants, for example, you'd find young Palestinians who were speaking Hebrew and young Israeli Jews who were speaking Arabic. So there's a lot of a lot of cultural interaction between all of them, despite the very real political dispute. Of course, I don't want to give the impression that there's no political dispute. There's a huge political dispute. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Actually, we just ran out of time. I think we need more sessions to better understand the reality of Palestine and what this war has done to the Palestinian people and their life and its quality. But thank you so much for joining us today and making us better understand the reality of Palestine and what reality they have faced and sharing it with our audience around the world. Thank you so much.